Hey guys, welcome to Interpreting Wine Podcast, first ever spirit category series. For those of you that don't know me, I am the host and founder of Interpreting Wine, Lawrence Francis. And in July and August 2019, I sat down with 3 of the world's most respected rum experts, and we'll be bringing you their interviews as part of this series. These episodes will feature in order of release. In episode 281, Peter Holland, rum consultant, educator and writer. In episode 282, Sly Augustin, owner at Tiki Bar Institution, Trailer Happiness. And in episode 283, Dawn Davies MW, head buyer at the Whiskey Exchange. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast so that you'll get a notification when new episodes are released. And without further ado, here's today's episode of the Rum series. Today's episode of the podcast marks the start of a very special series with 3 global experts looking at the category of rum. Across these 3 episodes, we cover many different topics, including rum in its historical context, the current state of the category, how rum is communicated to the consumer, rum and cocktails, and of course I get to try a number of fine examples of just how good rum can be. What better place to start the series then? With rum consultant, educator and writer Peter Holland. In our conversation, he shares his rum origin story, gives me a rum 101 and places rum in its historical context, before we dive into the glass with a tasting of 2 rums. Enjoy.
My name's Peter Holland. I'm a freelancer in the world of rum. Before that I was a blogger, so very much a lapsed blogger now. And I do all kinds of exciting things like consultancy, so I can't necessarily talk about that because NDAs, etc. But I do brand work for a couple of brands, and 10 years basically of rum life, all sorts of rum life. I've travelled around the world quite extensively to rum producers. I would like to say that I've just seen them all. I haven't seen them all, not yet. There's plenty more to see. But I think we've been there, seen it, have an opinion now. I feel happy to express an opinion on the state of rum. Can't say there was a particular single rum experience. The honest reason is that the lady that became my wife is, to paint the picture for radio, I'm a white man, 46 years old, slightly chubby. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, but I met my wife-to-be. She's of West Indian extraction, born in England, but her parents are from the West Indies. So her mum's from Barbados, her father's from St Vincent. And so when I started dating her, the world of rum sort of slowly started to seep into my world. Prior to that, I'm very much a beer drinker, lager drinker, as was. Spirits, not really. I see Pauline drinking brandy and things like that and going like, that's crazy. How are you drinking neat spirits? What's that all about? And it kind of picked up. But you go around to the parent-in-laws and like Sunday lunch, and out comes a bottle of something or other. Could be probably Sunset Strong, given that Murray's from St Vincent. And yeah, they are rum. It's out on the table. But it's probably not until 2008 when I went to my first UK Rum Fest. Series of coincidences. Pauline happened to be worked in business travel at the time, had a hotel available, £10 a night. Wonderful deal. So we're in London. What's going on? Oh, it's this London UK Rum Fest. It's like, what's that all about? We should pop down and see that. We'd already got the website when I didn't introduce myself in that respect. TheFloatingRumShack.com was the website I'd already got registered, but we hadn't started blogging at that point. So we went along to Rumfest. Couldn't believe just how big the world of rum really was. It was the second year that it had run. I've not missed a day since. I really regret not going to the very first 2 days, but the previous year. But anyway, it had such a wonderful time. Had to go back the following day. Did. And it's almost like it was destined to be, because we got invited to some launch parties off the back of that. And then a few months later, sort of into April the following year, 2009, Around about my wife's birthday, happened to be the Miami Rum Festival. So Pauline working in business travel, like, Pauline, just how cheaply do you think you could get us to Miami for a long weekend? Lots of things have changed in the travel industry since then, but she pulled together things. We went over Thursday through Tuesday, had a blast over there as well, and that really sort of cemented it. So a number of things came together. I worked in engineering at the time. My background is mechanical engineering, so I think I have a fairly analytical mind. I like to understand how things work with a reasonably healthy disregard for marketing. Well, at least the soft, fluffy kind, anyway. The stuff that tells you useful things. Well, that's something else. So it's understanding why does something taste the way it does, to understand all these different processes. I fully admit, 10 years ago, I was very much of like, woohoo, rum. Yeah, just having the word rum on the label is good enough, and all rum is awesome. Over the next few years, that hobby actually was quite important to me because the day job was quite stressful. And then having the ability to stop and sit and write up rum clubs or whatever it might be, it was pretty cool. It was a nice stress relief. It was a nice counterpoint to the stresses of the day. So, living closer to London than I do now, I was only sort of just like half hour outside London. You can always pop in. There's always a masterclass going on. Rum clubs at Trailer Happiness, for example. Always something going on. And if I was motivated by a free drink, then I was more broadly spirits led. Like, you could drink for free in London every night. I think there was always something going on. Friends at work used to tease me, wow, going out for a free drink again. Well, not really. It was like, like an hour and a half each way. I mean, round trip, and, you put in the hours. But it got to the point where that glass ceiling kind of hit. There's no more hours you can give the hobby. You're looking for what's the next step. So then it kind of was a small lull, but then in 2014, I went full-time rum, jumped out of the industry I was in. And then like a year or so later, started picking up the first brand job. So doing all kinds of things in between. So a little bit of writing, a little bit, Twitter tastings, just tasting events, anything and everything really, as long as it's promoting the category of rum.
That's fantastic, yeah, and I think, thank you so much for sharing that, and I think it's really inspiring, and I think it shows that you've got to sort of put in the hours, and you may have some doubters in your midst, in your circle, but within a relatively short space of time, you managed to transition from a very different industry, engineering, through to making your passion, making it your job, which I think is again super inspiring. And I think actually, based on almost those two worlds coming together, I actually, don't think there's anyone better that I would want to kind of, lay the foundations for us in this series and lay the foundations for me in terms of just, talking us through what is rum. I guess drawing out the interesting things and in the production, I guess some of the variation, island to island, region to region, potentially talking about, I guess, French origin and West Indian origin and South American origin. It feels like that part of the world, and being, my dad being Jamaican and, knowing some of the diversity on that particular island, it feels like it's probably a very diverse region. And I think it would help just to kind of, set the foundation to just have some clarity now about, what's going on in terms of how rum is produced and where it's produced and what that might result in the glass.
So very simply, rum is a spirit, and it's made from sugarcane. And that's it. That's as simple as it really needs to be. Rum is a very diverse spirit, and so we'll drill down into that a little bit. People normally talk about, what's the base? Okay, so I said it's sugarcane. So what do we mean by that? Sugarcane juice. So sugarcane grows all around the tropics. It's a crop that's been cultivated over the last sort of 10,000 years to what we know now. If you get that, it's a grass-like plant. You get it, you crush it, you collect the juice. That juice is naturally sweet. If you just left it in a bucket, that juice, and just left it out in the open, it would start to ferment on its own. Natural wild yeast out from the air would come in, and that process of fermentation is converting the sugars in the juice to alcohol. And that's very simple. Most rum in the world is made from molasses. and molasses is the byproduct of sugar production. So if you took that juice and you boiled it, and the sugar crystals start to form, you centrifuge, you collect those sugar crystals. After a period of time, you can't collect any more. You're left with molasses. That process normally takes about 3 goes. Molasses itself is still very sweet, naturally sweet, packed with all sorts of good things in terms of minerals and things in there, and still ferments very readily. So you could take that molasses, which is by now a lot thicker. You could water it down, like 1 part molasses to say 6 parts water, and again you could leave it. Or you could introduce a standard yeast if you wish to, a packet yeast. So then fermentation starts. Fermentation is the clever part. Alcohol out of thin air. I try not to be blasphemous, but I'm not particularly religious either. But like alcohol out of thin air is proof there's a God, and God loves us, obviously. Try not to offend too many people. But the process of fermentation is much more than that. So let's kind of hold that thought, come back to it. So how you've got after fermentation, you've got a wine that could be anywhere between 8 and 10% ABV. And if you're making whiskey, you're in the same position. You end up with a beer. You can call it a beer. How do you then get it to a spirit? Well, then you distill it. So what you're doing in distillation, you're collecting the volatile components you want and disregarding the non-volatiles or the components that you don't want. It sounds exceptionally simple. And in the old days, the very old days, if you go back centuries, then people were using pot stills because that's the technology they had. So where did rum start? So there are various schools of thought. If you head out to India, you rewind maybe 1,000 years, this notion that distillation was a known process. The country had sugarcane. The likelihood is they could have been doing it. Could have been. Pass. Who knows exactly? And we'll never know that. I certainly know that India likes to claim that sort of the home of rum in some respects. Go out to Brazil in the 1500s. The Spanish and Portuguese have been out running around the world, making a bit of a mess of things. Took sugarcane with them. Simplifying history somewhat there, but Portugal planting all kinds of sugarcane in Brazil. Again, you see there are records of stills being found in 1536 in parts of Brazil. So distillation's going on there. Just try and remember to come back to the cultural aspect of rum. Rum as we know it, I think, is fair to say that in the 1600s, in the Caribbean, rum of a style that you would say is recognisable now is being made. So what is rum? It's kind of... the process is what rum is. So in Barbados, for example, in the 1600s, you'd have sugar plantations all across the island. There's all kinds of history that goes with that. People are making sugar. You end up with molasses and other things like that. But you need a spirit that placates quite frankly, the slave workforce. The rum has a very long history. It's at times it's blood-soaked and it's awful. But we shouldn't ignore that. We certainly shouldn't gloss over it. It is a drink that was there to placate the slaves, and in places like the French, Caribbean, Portuguese, Spanish, there was never a desire for that spirit to then go anywhere other than for the lower class, the working class, or whatever it may be. So it's an interesting situation. In the English Caribbean, I say English, I generalise a little bit there, but like the parts of Jamaica, Barbados, and things, places where we've rocked up and grabbed that land. Actually, the Brits don't have a history of spirits. French had brandy and the like, but we don't have a spirit really made in the country that at that time that's sort of as recognisable. So, twisting this around a little bit. There was a desire to we got this rum, it tastes pretty good. And there was a desire to export it from the island. So culturally, we embraced it. And I say we, I'm using the royal we, the British we, in this respect. We embraced rum fairly early on. And as a consequence, because there was a desire, because it was commercial, because there was a desire to make good rum, we invested time and energy in it. And so very quickly, Barbados rum, Jamaican rum, becomes one of the finest spirits in the world. Richard Seale, when he does his presentations on Foursquare rum, makes reference to the fact that Barbados was probably one of the biggest spirits producers in the world at a certain period of time. things change. Sugar industry in Barbados started to collapse, and it's the same everywhere else. Anything that's a commodity, unfortunately, has the price driven out of it, and that's you can say that across all industries. And so things change, but rum making history and culture survive. So in certain parts of the world, rum would have been sort of suppressed. They were probably making lots of it, and it became the drink of like the common people. So like in Brazil, it's still massive. It's absolutely massive. But it was only reasonably recent times that they go, actually, no, this is something we can export. Well, it's something we can be proud of, and something changed. So history, culturally, things have changed over time. And so producers that weren't perhaps making it in volume several centuries ago start to now make it once they realise it is a saleable item. So they have a different history. So we can then go and let's take that and then sort of go back to the distillation side of things. So pot stills have been everywhere. However, 1832 is when Anais Coffee sort of patents and refines the process of continuous distillation. So people have been chasing this idea up to now. So everything up to then is pot stills and batch process. A pot still is a proper artisanal piece of kit. You can automate certain functions of it, but you're still requiring the skill of the operator to get a good spirit out of it. But depending on how you cut on that, from heads to heart to tails, gives you a different character to the spirit. So you can have a very small hearts cut that could be, relatively speaking, quite clean, or you could have a very early heads cut, a very late tails cut, and have an immensely characterful spirit that's poles apart. And so it is a very artisanal piece of equipment. Continuous distillation works on fractional distillation, and so once it's set up and running, as long as all inputs and processes are stable, the output is stable, and that's good, because you've got alcohol continually being produced, as long as you can keep feeding the wine and keep the heat stabilization consistent. But the notion of fractional distillation is that it tends to be a lot cleaner. So the spirit you draw from the spirit plate is the one you're after. You may have the option to draw from a plate above or below, but you end up with a very clean spirit in comparison. So some countries in the world, when these column stills have come online, if they're getting into rum for the first time, they're going to look around and go, well, what technology is on the marketplace, and they're going to tend to use that technology that's available. They would have still been making rum using pot stills back when, but it's this notion of ramping up and making more of it, making it a commercial item, so you look for what you've got. So I imagine in lots of cases the decisions are made based on financial. You know, it might take 8 hours to make 400 litres of pot still rum, but it might take 10 minutes to make on a modern multi-column system. So you go, well, 8 hours versus 10 minutes. So straight away someone's going to go, well, we should be making it using the column stills because we can make more of it at a better price. The flip side of that is, well, you're making potentially a more neutral spirit. So where's the rum character where you haven't got it so much? So there are balances. So in Barbados, for example, they adopted the column still relatively early on, but they didn't get rid of their pot stills. So they make a blend of spirits, a pot column blend, and that's completely analogous to blended Scotch. You know, that this thing exists. Jamaica were very late in adopting the column still. I mean, like literally very, very late. And so they're very much driven by the pot still. And you only have to go to somewhere like Hampden Estate or Worthy Park, and that's all they use. They don't use any other kind of kit. And Hampden Estate rums are famous for their depth of character, and nobody else in the world makes rum like Hampden does. But then if you go to places like, you know, to Nicaragua, for example, or Panama for that matter, or Puerto Rico, pretty much everything's being made on modern multi-column stills. And when I say multi-column, this is it's the addition of like hydroselection and demethylizing columns that really super efficient, not waste a single particle of ethanol. As a consequence, produce a very clean spirit, or capable of producing a very clean spirit. Column stills in themselves are quite configurable. So if you go to Clarendon in Jamaica, for example, they're able to make a spirit that's anywhere between tens of esters being the sort of like the marker, the measurement of flavour intensity, through to like hundreds of esters off a single column still. So very highly configurable. And rum, by that token, has become a commodity item in certain markets. So certain producers in the world don't have necessarily a brand of their own, or have only just started to create brands of their own, because their whole history has been predicated on making bulk rum because, again, the British influence is the Navy, the Royal Navy. Ever since the 1600s, once the Royal Navy discovered rum, they were hooked on it, and they consumed huge quantities of it. And without them consuming it, I have to also wonder whether actually some producers in the world would have survived to the modern era. Maybe they would have fallen by the wayside. Certainly, if you go back a few centuries, there was hundreds of producers, smaller scale, and then you kind of get an industrialization. You get a kind of a bigger picture, and so some closer, like in Guyana, for example, there was all these different estates all across Guyana. But with privatisation of sugar and the industry, the stills that were located at Enmore, for example, or Versailles or Iflet or whatever, all got moved, and so now all those sort of historical stills they had are now all at the one Demerara Diamond Distillers, distillery, and it's a sad fact that privatisation means that things get closed because you've got to make things more efficiently, cost effectively. But in case of Guyana, they've preserved them. So the Port Mourant still has got centuries of history about it. The Versailles still, the Enmore column still. So a column still, but made of wood, with just enough copper in the right places to make it work properly. So Greenheart wood. So you have a unique history. So hinting at diversity, you've got Cuban style, you've got French. We haven't even talked into French agricole, and Jamaican style is very different to the Barbadian style, even though there are similarities on paper. When you put the two styles in a glass side by side, you immediately you can tell where they are. And then Nicaragua, Flor de Caña, all of these rums have different things. So we've got different fermentation, different distillation. We've got a different source. I mentioned that sugarcane juice. There are plenty of rums out there made from fermented sugarcane juice, sort of a cane juice or agricole if it's from certain parts of the French Caribbean. They taste very different again. That's almost like a whole different subject on its own. So you take these different source, different fermentation, different distillation, you can mature them in different ways. Then you throw into it regional styles, so that's those little slants that make it their own. You've got something that's really quite diverse. In the modern era, you furthermore complicate that by then saying, well, what about the notion of flavourings? So where rum has a genuine history, there are brands out there that are known to throw a little bit of extra vanillin or prune wine or certainly sugar, because sugar's a much more easily found item. But they'll sweeten their rums. Sweeten their rums. Now, sweet rums started a conversation a few years ago in, like authentic producers maybe calling out other producers saying this is not an authentic product. But it adds to the diversity. So when I do presentations to bartenders, invariably I'm talking to the trade, especially with the brand work that I do. We talk about building a diverse back bar. So you have to look at all these different styles of production, but we can't forget that actually sweet rum commercially is a very acceptable thing these days. People happily buy a bottle. But if your rum selection on your back bar was all sweet rum or all modern multi-column style rum, well, then you haven't really got any diversity. So you have to understand rum in order to get the diversity. Now, not everyone, I think you could probably do a straw poll of 100 people walking through the door, and only a couple of people are really going to in their heart, enjoy a full-bodied Hampden Estate pot still rum. Because it might be just a little bit too fulsome for most people. And I think you could probably do the same for whiskey. How many people really, really enjoy a heavily peated Octomore or something like that, or a Lafroig? Most people are going to be saying, well, actually, I quite like a blend. Johnny Walker's great for me. And a little hint of peaty kind of makes a little difference. So it's important to have that diversity. Now, understanding it, that's the clever part, and then there's ways of getting into it. So you either, like me, you kind of throw yourself into it over the years, and you go from rum is wonderful, rum is everything, to going like, well, actually, a lot of these rums, even though they're from different countries, are actually remarkably similar, and perhaps I don't care for that style of rum so much now. And what is it about these that I like? So then the rums that I drink on a day-to-day basis are actually a lot closer in style for a reason that I actually, also, I suppose when you drink a lot of rum, you kind of, you need something that stands out on the palate a little bit. Very light styles don't necessarily cut the mustard these days. And 40% doesn't often cut the mustard these days. I start at 46% and work up. So you've got to help people on that journey. So I arrived into rum going like, wow, rum's amazing, rum's diverse. And then I kind of I sort of dropped off a few years ago, going like, it seemed like a lot of producers were just adding sugar to rum and lying and keeping things hidden. But actually, when you take a step back and you look at all the authentic producers, and they tend to be the ones that have been producing for a long time, they don't need to bugger around with their spirit because they've been making characterful rum for a long time. They know how to do it well. They don't need the shenanigans and the parlour tricks, so they just make good rum. And so actually there's a whole category of sort of flavoured spirits that I don't need to bother with these days. I can just enjoy the good stuff. Once you start drilling down into rum, you realise there are more details and you have to kind of ask deeper questions. You go through plateaus, don't you? You find things out, you learn, you move on, and then you realise what the next question is that you need to ask, and that process of learning continues. However, in the world of rum, there are companies that want to work in there. One of the rum's companies that I work with is called That Boutique Rum Company. They're an independent bottler, so this is one of the brands that I work with. You mentioned about bringing some rum. Why not? Let's bring this, because we talk about diversity. The Boutique Rum Company is for me is an ideal vehicle because it allows me to bring interesting expressions to market. We've got something like 20 plus released since like last October when the company launched. But we have 2 rums in front of us. So the first one, Casa Santana. This is a rum released just literally a few weeks back. It's on the categorization scale. You'd say this is a modern rum. It's a multi-column rum. This means that the base spirit is potentially a little lighter on average than you might get from somewhere like a Handham Estate or Worthy Park in Jamaica. But what I like about this one is that they actually take some single column marks as well. And this is an aging house in Colombia. So again, we haven't mentioned Colombia before. Just for word of warning, that is 58.4% ABV. Well-made rum, though, shouldn't be a problem. What they do is they take these marks and then they run them through various blendings. So they don't actually distill at Casa Santana. They actually blend, and they actually make a lot of rums for other people. So they blend, bottle other labels, and they, in many respects, they stay in the background. I came across these because I did a Twitter tasting with them a few years back for a rum called La Hechicera, the Sorceress. I apologise for my Spanish. We did a Twitter tasting with them, and what we did is we actually deconstructed the rum, and we tried rums at various ages. So it was young, and then it moved on through, there was a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, and then we ended up kind of with the final blended spirit. And we were talking to the producers, and I was so taken with them that my workers with a boutique rum company is like, well, actually, I would love to just bottle some of these individual marks because they tell a fantastic story. Now, for those who've got time to spend, this, they say, might be a relatively light rum, but the complexities of blending and aging that come out are just wonderful. It's so fruity, it's so dynamic, it's progressive as well. You have that first sniff and you leave it in the glass and you come back to it a little later and it's developed, it's moved on. I was doing tasting notes for the I flew to Tales of the Cocktail the other day as a smaller side. I was a little behind with my tasting notes, so I took drams of all these different rums with me, and I was sitting on the plane doing the tasting notes. And normally a plane is a terrible place to do tasting notes because of the air conditioning, but even despite that I was able to spend some time and I got so much from it. It really is wonderful. The rum's available on Master and Malt, and it sold out pretty damn quickly. Fortunately, it's a big outrun, so I managed to persuade them they need to get another allocation. But this is a kind of a rum for me that it has lots to talk about, but it's a nice opener. This isn't in terms of the ABV at 58.4. That's not a child's play ABV. This is for people that are already used to spirits, but this isn't a challenging rum, and yet it rewards you with lots on the palate. And so, I could quite happily drink this all day long, really. This is a very, very nice rum. I always say that the Boutique Rum Company doesn't add anything or do anything to it, so that what you're trying here is a little below cask strength as supplied to us. It's been watered down just a little bit, but there's no caramel or anything added to it, so that lovely golden colour is a true colour. So this is what you might say a light rum. The other rum that we picked out of, I have so many rums to pick out from the table. This is from Diamond Distillery. This is a single malt from the Port Mourant, and the Port Mourant is a double pot still, but it's actually constructed again from green heartwood. I made mention of that earlier on. So this is a still that's got centuries of history. For me, it's got a very distinctive note on it. I'll take the Pepsi challenge. I can pick the Port Mourant out, that particular flavour note out in many blends. many styles. This one is a rum that spent part of its time maturing in the Caribbean, in Guyana, and then part of the time maturing in the UK. So this notion of dual maturation locations comes up. The Casa Santana was aged entirely in Colombia. That leads to a question, so what's the difference? What's the difference between tropical and continental aging? Well, that's a whole nother level of things to talk about. Rum, once you start digging down, you find there's so much more to it, really, really so much more. So there's a whole lot of questions that you ask yourself to start with, and then when you know a bit more, then there's a whole nother wave, and then you ask yourself a bit more. And I don't want to sound like I know it all. I certainly do not know it all. Now the questions I want to ask are the ones where I have to kind of almost go and intern myself at a distillery to see if I can learn a bit more, So there's lots to learn. This is Casa Santana was 12 years old, which is quite an old age for a tropically aged Colombian rum. The Port Mourant is 11 years old. This is batch 2 in the release. So for those that bought batch 1, there's a slight variation in flavour. We're talking about single casks, so you actually get the influence of the cask on the spirit contained inside it, and casks give up flavour differently. Maturation is not just getting older; it's not drawing colour. Colour isn't a flavour, and if you ever talk about classification more in future, then you know why. Yeah, we haven't even really talked about white, gold, and dark. See-through rum is see-through; it is what it is. But gold to dark. I mean, when do we stop talking about gold rum and start talking about dark? Are we going to mutually agree a Pantone number, or a round number? Do we go down to home base and pick up a Dulux catalogue and decide that misty chestnut is the transition colour between gold and dark? It's not. It's pointless, and so we have to educate. So what why am I doing what I'm doing? Because we're educating people. We want rum to be seen as an aspirational spirit. And for me, sitting drinking this Port Mourant is lovely. I could have bought any rum. I'm particularly associated. I love Coroni. I love aged agricole rum or cane juice rums. My palate is quite diverse. But it's kind of what I like is one thing, but what other people will respond to, I have to be mindful of as well. Because if I'm going to do a tasting and people haven't tried a rum before, well, then I want them to try something that's not going to put them off. My very first whiskey I ever tried was a Lefroy, a 10-year-old Lefroy. And quite frankly, it put me off. It took me a few years before I came back to whiskey again. I thought, well, if this is what whiskey tastes like, I don't think I want any of that. It was horrible. I'm still not a big peated whiskey fan, I have to say. But so we have to guide people's impressions, and so this idea of I talked about sugar in rum and things. So if people only drink sugared rums, well, that's what they think rum is. And if they like sugared rums, well, that's great, because we all need to be happy. First and foremost, drink something that you enjoy. There's too much unhappiness in this world. So if drinking that style makes you happy, great. But understand that it tastes the way it does because of how it's been made. But it might be actually that you then say, well, I'll try this, and it might be you respond to it a little better. So, talking to your bartender, your friendly bartender, is definitely a way of getting more out, but not. I say this guardedly. I'm sitting in Merchant House at this point. They have an excellent rum selection here. You have to talk to a bartender who understands their spirit. To have the best journey. Otherwise, they might just keep pulling out the same style of industrial multi-column rum, and you don't really get anywhere. You've got to be taken on a journey. So. Casa Santana is a wonderful one to start with in this case, out of a selection of 3, because I've got a Corona here as well. But the Port Mourant, that's a step up, a little bit more full-bodied, a little heavier going. Again, it's a delicious spirit, lots of fruit and just all kinds of things going on in there. But a little heavier, so a little dieselier, a little more pot still coming through there. And then if we went further, if we had time, I'd pour some Corona in your glass as well. But we have to draw a line somewhere, don't we? We do these things, and once you get going, there's so many to try. Yeah.
Those are 2, I think, really well chosen rums there, because as everything you just said, I'm going along with in terms of the color is quite different, the style is really quite different, and again, I see this in the wine world, I see this in any of the spirits categories that I'm covering as well, is that people will often use the percentage alcohol as a byword for the strength. People say to me in sort of the wine shop where I work, they say, oh, it's 40%. If they're talking about spirits, that's too strong. they're perceiving that's going to be harsh on the throat. They're going to get an alcohol burn, and I was exactly the same. And I'm sitting here, and we're sitting here looking at these two, 58.4% for the Casa Santana, 56.4% for the Diamond Distillery. We're having them neat, smooth. All of these are amazing tasting notes that you've talked to there. Very, very distinctive, and it's a bit of a sort of a difficult term to pin down, but authentic. They don't feel like they've been manipulated with. They don't feel like they've been no additives. It's just what kind of what nature intended, I guess. It's these just feel like very authentic, very real rums that I guess are really telling their own story, telling part of that diversity in the glass, which I think is at the end of the day is sort of the fun part, isn't it? I think to round off today, really, and to round off the first part of this rum series, I guess I'd just ask you to look forward. Really, we're here with some amazing rums on the table. You've spoken already about some of the releases, some of the niche releases, and the followers and the people who maybe have helped these first releases to sell out. What do you see happening out there, I guess, in the wider market? People who maybe haven't had the pleasure of contacting these rums, and you've spoken already a little bit about the finding a barman and a space like we're in today where they can kind of start to have that conversation. What about somebody out there who doesn't have as easily access as we are in London to somewhere like that? What sort of things can they do to explore the category and feed their enthusiasm?
So we've got the world has changed a lot. I think, for the better. For the last 10 years, people have been saying rum's the next big thing. Journalists the world over love a good soundbite. And I would suggest that rum as a category has been growing steadily. Not spiking. I wouldn't want it to spike, because if it spikes, it might then trough, and we don't want a bubble, so to speak. So there are an ever-increasingly good selection of booze hitting the market. If I might compare rum and whiskey side by side, I would say that just as we know there are exceptional whiskies, I would say the bottom end of whiskey, especially in Scotch, isn't bad. Just at best, it's a little bit dull. That's the worst thing you could say about Scotch whiskey, for example. The trouble with rum is that the very good stuff is truly exceptional, but the bottom end of rum is really awful, and not to be dabbled with at all. But when you have a very inexpensive spirit and you fill it up with all kinds of crap, and you put it in a pretty bottle, then you end up with a situation where then it's quite marketable and it gets out there. So I have a concern for the future that we do need to continue to work hard on education, because people's idea of rum is going to be shaped by what they've got in front of them. And if you've just got, quite frankly, a bottle of crap, well, then you're not necessarily well, good luck if you enjoyed it. That's fine, because there's a rum for everyone. But but you're never going to think that rum's going to be any better. So when I started blogging, the Floating Rum Shack was pretty much not the only rum blog in the UK. So it's good to be in a pool. You can be good in a pool of one. But we weren't the only people. But now there are a lot more bloggers out there. There are a lot more people talking about rum, and the conversation of rum has moved on significantly. So we're a lot more connected. Please nobody look at my website. It's not mobile friendly, and it's crap, and it hasn't been updated for 6 months. I am a lapsed blogger, but people, you're stood in a shop, you can, what is this? You can quickly look on the forum, you can look things up. So for those that are interested, there's a wealth of information out there, and whilst just because it's written on the internet doesn't necessarily make it true, with a little bit of diligence, you can probably pick out one or two good things. So you can find out about your rum much more quickly. So I am positive. Last year, Vellier worked with Hampden Estate, and they released Hampden Estate to the world. Hampden, I've referred to them before, a distillery making bulk effectively for several centuries, and very good at it. But they have a brand now under their own name, and so they're now protecting that. So there's all kinds of conversations going on about promoting their own brands and giving credit to the people that are making it, rather than people that take it over to Europe or to wherever and blend it and bottle it. So Captain Morgan, there isn't a Captain Morgan distillery. This is a bulk bought product that's blended and then bottled under a different name. And there's woods, lambs, all kinds of companies doing this and have done for a long time. And without, actually, to be fair, without the Woods and the Lambs of this world, then maybe some of these rum distilleries wouldn't be where they are these days. So we can't forget that. But it's really good to see producers getting the credit for it. So the top end, so when Hampden Estate was released, September, October last year, for me, that lifted the top end of rum. Not because a single cask rum wasn't available, because it was. So single cask bottlings are always available. But this is a commercially available in number, something that a bartender could maybe even put a cocktail program around if they felt they could afford the price. So when you've got commercially available rum of that ilk, and you have producers in the French Caribbean wanting to export more widely, that actually the top end gets better and better and better. So I work also, I work with Boutique Rum Company. I also work with Foursquare. They keep winning awards left, right, and centre, and not because they enter everything going. It's just because they're generally well recognised for making an excellent spirit. Richard Seale's been very positive in his leading the conversation about authentic spirits and about what is it you've got in your glass. Drink what you like, but just know what you've got there. So I'm quite positive about it. I do know that if rum continues to be seen to be as a popular spirit, then people are going to want to make a buck. They're going to want to tap into it, and they're going to do something, and they're going to take something cheap, they're going to put some flavourings in it, and they're going to pass it off and hope to make a few quid. And so the bottom end, I think, unfortunately, will continue to get further away from the top end. The biggest issue we got, I think, also is that we need to differentiate spice rum and rum. Spice rum is immensely popular. It's got lots of followers, and it really is one of the big success stories. But don't confuse the flavoured product with the authentic thing. If you're all about vodka, if you love vodka and that's all you wanted to drink, and someone said, here's a gin. It's not vodka. It's been flavoured. And we have the same thing. So here's a rum, but we've stuck loads of flavouring in it. It is what it is. It's going to continue to grow that subcategory. But let's not confuse spice rum and rum. Let's try and let's protect the category as it stands. So I am pretty positive. I think there's lots of good things to do. I hope that people continue to employ a freelance consultant, such as myself, available for hire, all good stores. But also to educate. So I generally see that I think there's a lot to be done on education. So I think there's lots of work to continue to do. But I think whenever I do a tasting, it's like, I don't know what people's pickups are, but I kind of work on a 1 in 10. If I can get one person in 10 to go like, oh my goodness me, that I didn't expect that. That's amazing. You've converted me. I consider that to be a good odds. So I keep working on that respect, and I'll keep chipping away with the brands as they help me to tell the story. I work with brands that want me to tell that story. That's why they chose me in the first place. But we've got a lot of work to do. So when a rum comes to market that smells like a bonfire, I kind of wonder why. But that's okay. If you're drinking it, it's fine. But as long as we realise that that's a flavoured product and not a real thing, then that's pretty cool. So positive, but lots of work to do.
Thank you so much to Peter. It was a real pleasure sitting down with you. Huge thanks also to Merchant House London, where the interview took place. As ever, I've left all of the various websites and social media handles where you can reach out directly to Peter. So do please get in contact with him and let him know what you thought. And of course, I would love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, or email hello@interpretingwine.com. We change tack next time in the Rum series, episode 282, where we talk tiki and rum cocktails with Trailer Happiness owner Sly Augustin. See you then. Hello again, guys. Just want to say a huge thank you for listening so far to the series. I really hope that the podcast in general, and that this series in particular, is bringing you a lot of value. And while we're on the subject, if you know a rum or spirits fanatic, it would mean the world to me if you would share this series with them, either by sharing the link where they can listen to this episode, or by tagging them in my Rum series post on Interpreting Wine on Instagram. And while you're there, why not give me a follow, and let's continue the rum conversation over there.